Today on History's Tech, we are looking at the Monitor warships. This rather unique class of warship was built around small ships that packed more firepower than they should have for their size. And its design starts all the way back in the mid 19th century and actually goes all the way up to the present day. But let's go ahead and look at the history of the Monitor warship. Now, of course, we cannot look at the Monitor warship without looking at its namesake, the very first Monitor type ship, and that is the USS Monitor. Now, when the Monitor was being designed, it was around a period of time, and roughly in the 1850s, when several navies, such as the French and the British, had already started to develop their own ironclad warships. And the United States Navy was kind of slow to developing this ship. They kind of saw it as a novelty. They didn't really see the effect of these newer iron ships yet until the Confederacy captured the USS Merrimack and converted it into their own ironclad warship known as the CSS Virginia. And so production began immediately speeding up on what would become the USS Monitor. Now, the Monitor was a completely unconventional ship, very low freeboard. The way the hull was designed, the armor plating on it, and the fact that it had a series of cannons on it that were way larger than it should have in a rotating turret meant this was a completely unconventional ship. And it tested this unconventionalness of it at the Battle of Hampton Roads, where it faced the CSS Virginia. Now, the battle is basically a draw at the end. Neither ship manages to sink the other, but this signals the beginning of the change from wooden ships to iron that is completely come. It's no longer going to be a mixture like we were seeing like the Crimean War in the 1800s or anything like that. It is now time for 100% metal on metal ship combat. And it only takes a few years after that that other navies begin copying the design of the Monitor. And so from then on, the Monitor becomes this type of class of these smaller ships with the lower freeboards and these large guns on it. Now, the man who designed the USS Monitor, John Ericsson, takes the design back to Sweden after the American Civil War and actually gives Sweden the edge over everyone else to start building their own Monitor type warships. And it's here the design basically explodes. Europe and South America will both begin developing their own Monitor type ships, and there's actually going to be different types of them. There will be multi-turreted versions. There will be those propelled by paddle wheels in addition to screws. We'll see semi-submersible monitors. We'll see types of monitors armed with spar torpedoes. And so this is where the name Monitor really starts to come in for this unique class of ships. And Monitor typically will refer to a type of ship with that low freeboard. They don't have a mast. They are steam-powered. Multiple turrets typically have large guns. Now, with all of these innovations, one of the biggest ones was to attempt to make a more seaworthy version of a Monitor. And in fact, the USS Monitor was lost in rough seas because it wasn't designed to go into rough seas. So a new type of monitor is developed known as the breastwork monitor. Now, to make them more seaworthy, they actually raised the turrets up and had a heavier superstructure on the platform above the hull. Now, they still weren't great for seagoing. They were limited due to their steam and the range of the ship due to weight and some size. However, it showed that they could be a little bit more versatile. But because they were slightly better at being seaworthy, they were actually deployed in the Spanish-American War, where they would take place in conflicts such as the bombardment of San Juan, the Battle of Fajardo, and the Philippines campaign, showing their versatility in being able to cross even oceans. At the turn of the 20th century, the Monitor starts to be kind of relegated to a back duty. They're even being limited in their role as patrol ships and coastal defense ships, and they're being replaced by newer, faster ships. And that goes on until we reach World War I. Now, by the time we get to World War I, the Royal Navy had actually started to develop a new ship class that, while it didn't look anything like the Monitors of the 19th century, shared a lot of common characteristics. The poor seaworthiness, the shallow draft, and the heavy armament in a turret. Now, the first of these was known as the Humber class. Now, as the war progressed, the British kept building them because they were typically a little bit cheaper to produce and were good for coastal defense. Now, in order to better arm them, they actually started taking pre-dreadnought battleships and throwing the turrets on these ships, giving them an incredible amount of firepower for basically a coastal defense ship. And while the British were putting a lot of efforts into their monitors, the United States went in a different direction. By the time World War I had happened, the United States had relegated most of its monitor fleet to submarine duty. They had become submarine tenders. They could provide them with supplies and protect them. And the United States would retire its very last of its original style monitors in 1937, no longer building what we would consider an original style monitor. A few other nations also deployed their own monitors during the First World War. Austro-Hungarian Navy would deploy their own ships. However, after the war, their ships would be relegated to Serbia, Romania, Yugoslavia. And the Italians even did the development the similar way as the British, and they built their monitors using former battleship turrets. Now, after World War II, most navies got rid of their fleets of monitors, especially larger navies, as they didn't see a use for them anymore. With the exception of the British, they actually kept two of their monitors, the Cerberus and the Terror. But they went ahead during the interwar period and started to develop a new type of monitor known as the Roberts class. These new ships continued the tradition of British monitors in the 20th century by utilizing battleships as their main guns. And it actually fought in quite a bit of campaigns. They were there in the Mediterranean. They took part in the Italian campaigns, the invasion of Normandy. So they were a major part of the conflicts, and later on would actually fight in the Pacific. But other navies all deployed their own monitors during the war. The Italians, the Germans, the Yugoslavs, Croatians, and Romanians all had their own river monitors, some of them holdovers from the First World War. Even the Soviets got in on their own development of the river monitor during the Second World War, but these were mostly relegated to rivers and lakes within their territory. Now, after the war, most navies got rid of their monitors, with the British keeping theirs in service until the mid 1950s, and the Brazilians actually keeping their monitors in service until present day. However, it wasn't until we get to the Vietnam War that we see the resurgence and a need for a river patrol vessel. During the Vietnam War, the United States actually came up with multiple types of ships that could handle different operations. These included things such as swift boats and patrol river boats. And we even see the development of a new type of monitor. And it still goes along with a similar thing. It still has the lower freeboard and guns in a turret pattern that are much larger than probably necessary. Sadly, after the war ended, all but one of these vessels fell into the hands of the Vietnamese, and the United States stopped using the monitor. Now, today, only one navy in the entire world still actively deploys a monitor type warship, and that is the Parnaíba from Brazil. And it has been part of the Brazilian Navy since 1938 and is still in service today, although heavily modernized. Now, currently, only one country deploys a truly modern version of the monitor, and that is the Romanians, and they've been utilizing since 1993. But if you would like to visit somewhere and see one of the older style monitors, you can go to countries such as Australia, England, Chile, Russia, and quite a few more that all have older style monitors as museum quality ships that you can go and visit. Many of them you're actually able to get on the ship. Now, if you would like to visit the original monitor, the USS Monitor, you still have that opportunity. You can go to the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, and you can see the turret along with some artifacts. But there you have it, a look at the Monitor class warships. This was a rather unique warship. It was designed at a time when iron warships were new. They were trying to be innovative, and it had a lot of things that went against it and quite a few things that went for it, so much so that the design was kept relatively intact for roughly almost 80 years before it was basically abandoned in favor of newer ship designs. But that's it for today. I thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking to you on the next time.